Imagine stepping into a bustling Hollywood studio in the post-war era, bright spotlights illuminating shiny sets and costumed actors milling around in every corner. The city of Los Angeles was alive with creative energy, directors shouting instructions, makeup artists fussing over their stars, cameras rolling as yet another scene came to life. Into this electric atmosphere entered John Lawrence Russell, an aspiring actor with a soldier's poise and an undeniable on-screen presence. Beyond his stoic portrayal of justice and integrity in the Wild West, John's real-life story is one of bravery, mentorship, and dedication. From his heroic service in the Marine Corps to his rise as a Hollywood star and his lasting impact on co-stars and fans alike, we uncover the lesser-known chapters of this Western icon's life. Join us as we explore the legacy of one of television's greatest heroes. John was born on January 3, 1921, in the glitzy palm-lined metropolis of Los Angeles, California. Even in those early days of the 1920s, the city was bubbling with the magic of motion pictures. Los Angeles was brimming with young dreamers who believed that just maybe, if the stars aligned, they might stumble onto a set, catch the eye of a talent scout, and become the next big thing. For John Russell, though, showbiz wasn't even a consideration at first. He was simply a kid from a busy household, raised by his father, Jerry Abbott, and mother, Carolyn Abbott. Now, if those names ring any bells, you might be thinking of the legendary music scene in which Jerry Abbott, also sometimes known as the Elder Abbott, carved out a place for himself as well. It was a family steeped in creativity and artistic endeavor, though not all of it was directed at Hollywood in the beginning. Jerry Abbott's passion for music found its way into every corner of the house, filling John's formative years with melodies, rhythms, and a sense that one could and should boldly pursue a creative path. Meanwhile, Carolyn Abbott instilled a spirit of warmth and resilience that would serve her son well through the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead. Part of the secret sauce in John's upbringing was the presence of his siblings, including his brother Vinnie Paul. The two of them shared not just that familial bond, but a kindred eagerness to explore the world beyond their front door. Vinnie Paul eventually found his forte in music, collaborating with John on various artistic pursuits, though the full scope of those collaborations would only become clear much later in life. In these early days, though, John was just another brother, running around, playing ball, and soaking up the Los Angeles sunshine. He was a child who delighted in everything, from playing pretend in the backyard to rummaging through the local shops. And so, if you're trying to visualize John's childhood, imagine it layered with the hum of Jerry's guitars, the comforting presence of Carolyn, and the spirited camaraderie of siblings who had each other's backs through thick and thin. As John grew older, his interests multiplied. He found himself drawn to the art of performance in general, not necessarily acting yet, but the idea of being in front of people, doing something remarkable, had a gravitational pull that would not let go. This inclination manifested in some of his earliest forays into theater at school. Whether it was delivering lines in a class play or trying to command attention during impromptu comedic sketches, he revealed a flair for drama and a bit of showmanship that occasionally caught the eyes of teachers and classmates alike. Later, as a teen, he pushed his ambitions further, taking part in local productions, sometimes behind the scenes and sometimes front and center. His father might have imagined a music-oriented future for John, but John's interest in the stage was unmistakable. And though Jerry and Carolyn were supportive in a broad sense, John's path was destined to take a few surprising turns before he ever fully committed to an acting career. With the promise of big city life calling, John eventually enrolled in the University of California, a significant step that indicated he had more on his mind than just drifting into any random profession. At the university, he immersed himself in two main pursuits: drama and sports. Yes, that's right. John wasn't merely a stage kid, but also a talented athlete. He explored different teams from football to track, always willing to channel his physical abilities into something competitive. This duality, part performer, part athlete, helped shape the aura of ruggedness that would later translate so perfectly to Western roles. But let's not jump ahead. At this stage, he was simply a collegian, finding balance between reading lines in the drama department and running drills on the field. And then came the early 1940s, a time when the entire world seemed caught in a tumultuous whirlwind as World War II escalated. Like so many young Americans of that era, John felt the call of duty. In 1942, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. While some might join the service reluctantly, John embraced it with the full force of his determined spirit. He shipped out, undergoing the rigorous training that would prepare him for the brutal realities of the battlefield. Soon enough, he found himself in the thick of conflict, fighting in the Pacific Theater. Guadalcanal became one of the defining chapters of his life, where his extraordinary bravery earned him promotions and the respect of his fellow Marines. The John Russell who emerged from the war was different. He had seen hardship, pain, and sacrifice at a depth that few can fully comprehend. His experiences in the Marines formed an internal resilience that would remain central to his persona, on screen and off, for decades. Returning from war is never a simple transition, but John approached it with the same focus he had applied to all previous endeavors. He was discharged in 1944, and almost immediately he stepped into a new phase of life: marriage. That same year, he wed Ranita Russell. Their shared surname was a curious coincidence, but they seemed drawn together by more than just name. Ranita provided stability at a time when John was trying to piece together his post-war identity. Their union brought a measure of calm amid the hustle and chaos of Los Angeles in the mid-1940s, although John's ambitions were soon to propel him into the spotlight in ways neither of them could have predicted. Now, one of the magical elements about Hollywood in the 1940s was that talent scouts really would pop up in the most unexpected of places. It wasn't all about endless headshots and open call cattle auditions. Sometimes you might be sitting in a random restaurant minding your own business and bam, a casting agent might spot the striking features or confident demeanor that spells star power. That's precisely what happened to John Russell in 1945. Shortly after returning to civilian life, he was dining in a Beverly Hills restaurant when a talent scout observed his commanding presence. Perhaps it was that Marine Corps bearing, or the way he carried himself like a natural leading man, but the scout was intrigued. Before John quite knew what was happening, offers started rolling in for roles in Hollywood. He wasn't a big star from day one, far from it, but the door to cinema had swung open and John was eager to stride through. Between 1945 and 1954, John honed his craft in various B-movies. These were often lower-budget productions, generally churned out to satisfy the insatiable demand for content in theaters across America. He tackled roles that ranged from menacing villains to secondary characters that gave him just enough screen time to show glimmers of potential. While some actors dismissed B-movies as a rung on the ladder they were too proud to step on, John saw them as an opportunity, an arena to practice, grow, and demonstrate his versatility. Audiences of that era frequently saw him as the tough guy, brooding, sometimes violent, often misunderstood. Yet the real John Russell had a depth that was yet to be fully tapped by these early roles. If you watch any of those old B-movies today, you might notice fleeting moments of brilliance where John transcends the one-note roles he he was given. Those moments proved to casting directors that there was more to him than just a chiseled face or a steely glare. The big turning point came in 1955 when John was cast as Tim Kelly in Soldiers of Fortune. This series represented a huge step up, offering him a leading role rather than yet another cameo or secondary villain. He starred alongside Chick Chandler, and the show followed the high-adventure exploits of two trouble-seeking adventurers traveling to exotic locales. These guys would do everything from treasure hunting to battling nefarious forces, often in half-hour episodes that sparkled with mid-century enthusiasm for exploration. Tim Kelly, in particular, was portrayed as a daredevil with a streak of integrity, a role that played perfectly to John's background as a disciplined Marine with a sense of moral fortitude. Soldiers of Fortune ran for 52 episodes between 1955 and 1956, giving viewers a weekly dose of escapism. John's rugged good looks and understated acting style made Tim Kelly a character people could root for. This was no B-movie heavy. This was a genuine hero, a man of action whose bravery was only matched by his loyalty to sidekicks and innocent bystanders alike. For audiences, it was refreshing to see John Russell take the center stage after years of smaller parts. And for him, it was a chance to expand his horizons. He proved he could carry a series, manage complex stunts, and deliver lines in a way that was both authoritative and inviting. But nothing quite compared to the level of success that was about to land in John's lap when he took on the role of Marshal Dan Troop in Lawman. Running from 1958 to 1962, Lawman was set in Laramie, Wyoming, during the post-Civil War era. It was a time in American television when Westerns had become hugely popular. Audiences couldn't get enough of the raw frontier justice stories, the moral dilemmas, and the stark landscapes that formed the backdrop of the Old West. You had plenty of iconic Western shows at the time: Gunsmoke, Have Gun, Will Travel, The Rifleman, and more. But Lawman carved out its own niche. In the center of it all was John Russell as Marshal Dan Troop, stern, upright, almost stoic, yet never failing to bring a quiet humanity to the role. The tension in each episode often revolved around threats to the town: rustlers, con artists, desperate outlaws, and Dan Troop's skill in restoring order without sacrificing his core principles. But his relationship with his younger deputy, Johnny McKay, portrayed by Peter Brown, became the show's heart and soul. The dynamic was reminiscent of a father-son or mentor-mentee bond, with Dan Troop guiding the eager and sometimes impulsive Johnny. Behind the scenes, Peter Brown admired John Russell as a mentor off-camera as well. Brown credited Russell with teaching him the nuances of on-screen acting and how to exude a presence that reads authentically to viewers. The synergy between the two actors radiated through every frame. The success of Lawman wasn't purely about star power. Show business is a collaborative effort, and John was fortunate to be working with top-notch production teams, including producer Jules Shermer. Even though the filming schedule was hectic and budget sometimes constrained, the series maintained a high standard, thanks largely to the commitment of its cast and crew. John was known to be fiercely professional. He was the kind of guy who showed up on time, knew his lines, and treated everyone from the leading lady to the lighting technicians with respect. This dedication trickled down through the ranks, setting an example for the entire set. Lawman eventually wrapped in 1962, but its legacy as one of the classic Western TV shows endures. For John, it was a career peak and a reference point for how people would remember him for many years. Alongside the grand achievements in Lawman, John delivered an array of other memorable performances. If you're looking to see him in a darker, edgier context, check out the 1957 film Hellbound. Here, John plays the main antagonist, a cold-hearted criminal whose storyline involves a wild chase and eventually a dramatic ending in a shipyard. It was an entirely different vibe from the cool, upstanding Marshal. Audiences were intrigued by how convincingly he switched from hero to villain, capturing the chaotic impulses of a man driven by selfish motives. That versatility became one of John's hallmarks, and Hellbound is a prime example of the talent that might have blossomed even earlier had he not been typecast in smaller roles initially. In 1958, John also made an appearance on Maverick, specifically in the episode Rage for Vengeance. Maverick was an interesting platform for him because it mixed elements of Western adventure with a dash of humor and sophisticated cons. John's character was a conflicted cowboy wrestling with moral dilemmas, yet again showcasing that John didn't just do tough guys. He tackled roles that required emotional complexity. Around the same period, he turned up in an episode of Cheyenne titled The Empty Gun, portraying Matt Raren, a gunman seeking redemption. The emotional depth he brought to Raren was praised for its nuance, resonating with audiences who wanted something more introspective than the usual Western shootouts. John's portfolio also includes feature films that have become staples of classic Western cinema. In 1959, he was featured in Yellowstone Kelly, taking on the role of a Native American figure who commands respect. It was a smaller part, but one that allowed him to delve into cultural and personal complexities in a short amount of screen time. That same year, he had a role in the legendary Rio Bravo directed by Howard Hawks and starring none other than John Wayne, Dean Martin, and Ricky Nelson. Rio Bravo remains a high water mark in cinematic Western lore, lauded for its sharp dialogue, intense action sequences, and memorable characters. While John's part in it wasn't as central as the main cast, the mere fact that he shared the screen with these icons underscores the level of recognition he had reached by the late 1950s. Despite the relative stardom he enjoyed, life in Hollywood isn't always the red carpet fantasy some imagine. John had a grounded perspective, one that might have been shaped by his war experiences. He understood that the glitz can be fleeting, and the real rewards often come in the form of steady work, respect from peers, and the chance to connect with the audience. This workmanlike approach kept him employed in various projects through the 1960s and 1970s, occasionally returning to the big screen but more frequently popping up in character roles on television. He was never complacent, always seeking that next challenge, that next role that could help him refine his craft further. In his personal life, John was a bit of a paradox for the tabloids. He had a recognizable face and was considered a heartthrob in certain circles. Yet, he didn't engage much in the typical Hollywood nightlife. He was a family man at heart, evidently influenced by the warm home environment Jerry and Carolyn had fostered. Even his relationship with Vinnie Paul, though not always plastered across headlines, remained a source of creative camaraderie. John also stayed in touch with old friends like Peter Brown, forging a network of supportive colleagues who shared stories and advice. If a younger actor approached him for guidance, John was always willing to lend an ear. This generosity of spirit was not always common in the notoriously cutthroat film industry, but it was integral to who John Russell was as a human being. Time marches on, as it does for everyone, and by the 1980s, Westerns had fallen out of mainstream favor to a degree, replaced by other genres and modern narratives. John still found occasional gigs, whether as a guest star on popular TV shows or in minor film appearances. But the avalanche of roles that came in the 1950s and 1960s had slowed considerably. Health issues also began creeping into his life. Having endured the strains of war and decades of physically demanding roles, it was perhaps no surprise that his body started signaling that it was time to slow down. Still, slowing down gracefully was never an easy concept for someone who had scaled so many challenges throughout his life. He continued to show up and put in the work whenever a role aligned with his interests and abilities. His marriage to Renata Russell, begun so many decades earlier, had gone through its own ups and downs Hollywood marriages often do, but it endured enough to represent a substantial chapter in both their lives. Over the years, they shared experiences that only a few couples in the film industry could comprehend. Late-night script readings, unpredictable schedules, the joyous swirl of premiere parties, followed by quiet moments away from the camera's glare. Eventually, as the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, John's health took a more serious turn. On January 19, 1991, he passed away due to complications from emphysema, a condition involving infection in the space around the lungs. He was 70 years old. His death resonated deeply with those who remembered Lawman and the string of Western appearances that defined an era. While the younger generations may not have known his name as readily as they knew John Wayne or Clint Eastwood, he held a distinctive place in Western television lore, one that was revered by historians, die-hard fans of the genre, and industry professionals who recognized the craftsmanship he consistently brought to his work. He was laid to rest at the Los Angeles National Cemetery, an appropriate honor for a veteran who had served his country with distinction. For those who visited his gravesite, the solemn rows of white headstones might have conjured thoughts of the disciplined soldier who bravely fought in Guadalcanal decades earlier. It's a poignant reminder that John's life was more than just a Hollywood narrative. It was part of the larger American story, shaped by the forces of war, family, and creative ambition. John Russell's life was as compelling as the characters he portrayed. Whether as the upright Marshal Dan Troop or a fearless Marine, his legacy endures through his unforgettable performances and his impact on those he worked with. As we bid farewell to this legendary actor, we celebrate the man who embodied honor and professionalism both on and off the screen. Thank you for joining us in exploring the remarkable journey of John Russell. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about the icons who shaped our screens.